After 12 long years together, my partner, a girl I thought I'd spend my life with, ended things. I'm 31 now, she's 29, and it's been around 6 weeks since she left. Looking back, I honestly never saw it coming. I'm here to sort it all out, maybe try to make sense of where it all went wrong. From the beginning, our relationship was rocky, though not because we treated each other badly. I think the trouble stemmed more from our backgrounds. When we first met, I was barely 18, and she was 17. At first, I wasn't drawn to her, not physically anyway. I was a cocky, reckless teenager, masking pain with fake confidence, while she seemed lost and reserved, only showing up around our friend group because of one of our friend's girlfriends. She'd barely say a word, and I felt compelled to draw her out, make her laugh, and somehow I did. Funny thing is, she wasn't really my type, far from it, but something about her intrigued me. One summer, a group of us took a beach trip in an old RV. She came along, though at that point, she was still mostly quiet and kept to herself. After hours of driving, we parked in a Walmart lot to rest before hitting the beach. While everyone else slept, she came outside and sat on the curb with me. She had this strange kind of timid confidence. She wasn't exactly looking at me, but she seemed determined to chat. I remember thinking, what a strange girl, yet I was glad for the company. Talking to her felt surprisingly natural. I was still hiding my insecurities with a fake charm, but she saw through it. We talked for what felt like hours about dreams, struggles, fears, and hopes. That early morning conversation left a warm place in my heart, a memory I still hold on to. At the beach the next day, I noticed how she'd started opening up more, especially around me. In the water, she grabbed onto me when the waves got choppy, clinging as though it was life or death. I chuckled and reassured her, playing the hero even though the waves weren't that bad. I felt like I must have looked pretty cool, and she seemed charmed by it. We spent the day in this playful back and forth that was more memorable than I expected. Initially, I didn't see her as anything more than a friend. She was on my mind, though, and I caught myself trying to convince myself I wasn't interested, which only made her stick in my mind even more. We ended up seeing each other often, mostly for random reasons, giving her a ride to church, helping fix her car, taking her to graduation. Not long after, we were dating. Our nights often ended parked in secluded spots, lost in each other, and every time we found ourselves wanting more. Those nights were a blend of beauty and struggle. We were in love, or at least we thought so. Being apart felt like an ache in my chest. Our backgrounds shaped so much of who we were, for better and worse. We both came from broken homes and backgrounds full of hardship, abuse, poverty, neglect, all the painful things that push people together in search of comfort. We became each other's refuge, especially during those rough early years. Her mother was a textbook narcissist who gave her an ultimatum. Either get a job or go to school, or else she'd lose the privilege of seeing me. The only other option was that she stay home to care for her mom's newborn, which felt like a cruel compromise. Come live with me, I offered in my 19-year-old naivety, not understanding the full weight of that invitation. A few days later, she showed up at my mom's doorstep, crying, with all her belongings stuffed into a trash bag. Living under the same roof quickly brought problems to the surface. My relationship with my mom was already strained, and bringing my girlfriend into the mix only added fuel to the fire. We moved out after a year of loud arguments and tension, finding a tiny converted garage to rent. It was cramped, but for a while, being alone together was enough. I learned what it meant to be a partner, or as close as a 20-year-old could be. I had my flaws, selfishness, impatience, immaturity, but I loved her and wanted to protect her. She had her struggles too. From a young age, she dealt with mental health issues, and it wasn't unusual for her to hit herself when she was frustrated. I hated seeing her like that, and each time I'd hold her arms to stop her, feeling guilty as if I'd somehow caused it. Her malnutrition didn't help, and she'd sometimes have spasms from lack of food. Our arguments would escalate, with her shutting down completely, crying, and refusing to communicate. Her silence infuriated me, though I tried to hold back, even if my tone betrayed my frustration. One fight stands out in my memory. She'd locked herself in the bedroom, refusing to talk, and in my irritation, I pushed the door open. I saw her trembling and crying, and it hit me. I didn't recognize the person I was becoming. Ashamed, I apologized and left the room. In that moment, I realized how much I wanted to change for her, to be better, but that realization came after some damage had already been done. Throughout my life, I've struggled with depression, and I know now that our relationship only intensified that struggle. Initially, I'd hide my dark moods from her, but as time went on, they became harder to control. The weight of our lives, our responsibilities, and our struggles overwhelmed me. I felt stuck, unsure if I could keep going without some kind of change. I brought up the idea of buying a house, thinking that a fresh start might be what we needed. She was hesitant, but went along with it. I convinced myself and her that owning a place of our own would somehow solve our problems. Somehow at 21, working a barely paying construction job, while she worked as a caregiver for special needs children, we scraped together enough to buy a house. She hated it from the start, but I managed to talk her into it, convinced that a change in setting would help. But life didn't get easier. It only got harder. We were broke, and my mental health was falling apart. Our finances were in shambles, and I was barely keeping up with the endless repairs. We eventually rented out the house to make ends meet and lived in a cramped storage unit in the backyard. Looking back, I can't believe I put us through that. One night I started digging through her phone. I found half-deleted messages between her and a coworker, hinting that she'd developed feelings for him. Panic surged in me. I couldn't bear the thought that after everything, she might be cheating. I left without a word, crashing at my mom's house for a few days. She tried calling, texting, and when she finally got me on the phone, I told her I needed space. The next night after my shift, she showed up outside my work, crying and desperate to understand. I told her what I'd found in her texts, though I could barely get the words out through the hurt and anger. When I went home, I found letters she'd left, spilling her heart out and trying to explain. Her words were filled with remorse, fear, and pain, and reading them broke me. Each letter she left was more vulnerable than the last, and I realized I couldn't stand the idea of life without her. I called her, practically begging for her to come back, and the moment she returned, I knew I'd do anything to hold on to her. She explained it was just a crush, nothing serious, and we reconciled, though part of me never fully healed from that break. We tried to move forward, but the fractures were there. I became resentful, questioning our relationship, and my depression worsened. At times, she admitted she didn't even want to come home, and it was understandable. I had become a shell of myself, lost in bitterness. The more I felt her pulling away, the harder I tried to fix everything. She complained about trivial things, like my socks left on the floor, while I felt trapped, taking care of the house and every repair that came up. She claimed she wasn't a sexual person after a history of abuse, so I tried to accept it, telling myself it was selfish to expect intimacy. But feeling rejected wore on me. I needed love, affection, anything to feel like I mattered to her, but whenever I'd bring it up, her change would only last a week. It was disheartening to always be the one to initiate, leaving me wondering why I felt so alone with the one person I loved most. Then after returning from a girls' camping trip, she broke up with me on the spot. I was shattered. I begged her to reconsider, promising to work on myself. She stayed reluctantly and admitted later that it was only out of pity. I poured myself into trying to make her happy, working on myself, picking up chores, doing everything I could. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself, and the loneliness of being with her began to feel worse than being alone. Depression clung to me, no matter how hard I tried to shake it off. Still, things in our home eventually settled into a rhythm. We started finding what I thought was balance, something that felt like love and connection. It began to feel like home, even if the house itself wasn't much to look at, because we had each other, and that was enough. But then her mother entered the picture. She'd somehow talked a well-off factory owner into buying her a house, and out of the blue, she was offering for us to move in with her. I had my doubts, but it seemed like an opportunity, so we ended up selling our home and moving in with her. Not long after, though, it was clear that her mother's plan involved pressuring us to hand over most of what we'd earned from the sale. Realizing we had to get out of there, we faced a brutal housing market, one that made it tough to start fresh even with a large sum in hand. During this time, we found out we were pregnant. That news hit me like a stone in the gut. We didn't keep it, but there are still days I wonder about that decision, wondering what might have been if we'd chosen differently. She didn't even ask me before telling her mother we'd decided to leave. On top of it all, I'd quit my job shortly after we moved in, thinking a mental break was okay since we had some financial cushion. But when her mother started pulling strings, I had no choice but to take a job at the warehouse where she was working, and we started looking for a new home. We managed to find a decent place, though the payment was double what we'd been used to. We didn't have much choice. A few months in, I got laid off, and I just froze up in full-blown panic. She drove me home, and I went right back into job hunting. Luck would have it, my old job had an opening, and I got back in. Although we were still healing from the disaster with her mother, things were manageable. She started working out like crazy, and I didn't. But with our schedules finally in sync, we were getting more time together. We were having more and, honestly, better sex, even if I still had to make the first move most times. Sometimes it felt like she was just going along with it, but she'd say she didn't mind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even though I tried to ignore it. We talked about therapy since everything over the years had built up so much. It was clear we couldn't avoid facing our mental health. The insurance my work offered was ridiculously expensive, so we decided to get legally married so I could be on her plan. But as we finished up the paperwork, she hit me with, "I want you to propose to me properly." It cut me since it felt like this wedding was mostly for the insurance in the first place. But I told her I'd been planning to do it right, just waiting for the right moment. It wasn't an empty promise. Anyone who knew me knew I had been hoping to propose for years. Just somehow, the time had never felt quite right. We both got into therapy. She clicked with her therapist right away, but mine was a dud. No good insights, no real help. I lost faith in the sessions and decided to switch, finally going on antidepressants. The first batch helped, but I broke out in hives, so I had to try a different kind. Eventually, I found something that worked without any crazy side effects. Then out of nowhere, she started saying she hated that we'd gotten married just for the insurance. I opened up to her again, saying I'd always wanted to propose, and anyone could vouch for that. I think she doubted it, but she seemed to accept what I said, even though it seemed to hurt her to hear it. I felt like the world's biggest piece of crap and thought, I need to make this right. We'd been planning a trip to Japan with friends, and I thought, that'll be it. I'll propose on her dream trip. Then out of the blue, she wanted to talk about how upset she was that I had told her my plan to propose. I explained that I'd felt cornered after our previous argument, but I still wanted to make it special for her. I admitted that, sure, not every couple gets some magical movie-style proposal. Some people even go ring shopping together, but I could tell she wasn't soothed by that. Then came more drama with her mother and younger sister. Her sister had just come out of a mental health facility for girls. Another ordeal her mother had somehow created. She was a good kid, just needed to breathe away from that mess. So we told her she could stay with us as long as she needed to, even after she graduated. One day I woke up after a night shift to see her lacing up her hiking boots. She looked distant and uneasy. "I'm going hiking," she said, her voice barely steady. "By yourself?" I asked. I could tell something was wrong. When I pressed, she broke down in tears on the bed beside me. She told me she was anxious about us and felt like breaking up. I didn't grasp it fully right then, but I asked her to explain. After everything, this seemed to come out of nowhere. She said that just knowing I was planning to propose gave her anxiety, and that she thought she wanted to be alone, that she'd actually wanted to break up for a long time. When my wife left after 12 years together, she dropped some brutal truths that left me reeling. She told me that she hadn't been in love with me since our first year. She admitted she'd wanted to break up almost as long and had been emotionally cheating on me for years, always finding her way to others while I thought we were working through things. To top it off, she'd already moved on to someone she met while we were still married. In a way, all those years of hardships and trying to grow together felt hollow after what she revealed.